Movie theaters are modern-day pulpits. Real-world theology exists to shed a light on the narratives that are shaping our culture, and to remind viewers that entertainment is not mindless.
I mean, that's always been one of the trademarks of Real World. So if we get rid of all the other stuff, I think the sort of feeling that we're all friends and we've all just been talking, and all of a sudden we just started talking about movies is.
I like pretending sort of that we are friends and that we have, connections outside of this
like each other
situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's the thing. So you say that's the way it's always been. It is not the way it's always been.
Yeah.
That is something I intentionally switched up. I don't even remember where. Probably around episode 50 or something. It felt like I did that for like a year or two, or probably about a year, and then it for reasons, probably because I started having so many new people on all the time. There wasn't a familiarity there. And so just starting saying like, welcome to Real World Theology, this, I don't remember. The thing is, that's always been said, didn't it? Like, and then being like, hey, this is David, this is Ryan, and people being like, am I supposed to say hello? And then having to start a conversation from there, it just felt so awkward. So in lots of these cases, I was just meeting people basically like, audio for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
So it made them a lot more comfortable just chatting about like who they were and where they're coming from, and then eventually kind of fading into the conversation. It made editing a lot easier, and it made like the intros easier, which is why it was so complicated for me to in my mind switch that back, because I noticed that a lot of podcasts, they had their bumper, they had their intro that they go through, right. But also most of these podcasts had the same 2 or 3 people on it.
Yeah.
Like, 90% of the time. They'd occasionally
right.
bring a guest in, or maybe have like someone sit in, but it was always like David and Mikey. So it's like, hey Dave, hey Mikey, and so like then you could be all, so joining us today is Ryan. Oh yeah, hey Ryan, what's up? It would be like that. But since I was rotating people all the time, it was very hard to get some consistency with that. So
yeah,
sort of a little bit of a almost like drive time hosts kind of feel to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it would help. I mean, it helps with scheduling, right? Like if you only have to schedule 2 people, and you always know, and you can just set a day aside and a time, and be like, we know we're going to do this all the time. It makes life so much easier, which is one of the reasons I was leaning towards it there at the end when I was trying to just figure out how I could record at all with how life was.
Yeah.
So,
right.
And life has changed since then.
Life is so much.
Are there things you miss from before the pandemic still? Besides going to movies, there's a lot of people who want to go back to the theaters, but anything else you miss doing? That you're still like, I want to be able to do that freely whenever I want again.
I don't think there's anything that, like, there's not like a thing that we did that I really miss from pre-pandemic days that we don't have in some form back now. 2 years later, the thing that I don't want, or that I could do without, is like the unstopping or unceasing anxiety about every decision I make.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, so like my wife and I have gone to the theater a handful of times when it seemed prudent, but before we were also going to the theater. So I don't miss not going to the theater. I miss when we say, should we go to the theater to see blank movie, we have to plan it out, and then we have to think about its prudence. We have to think about the safety.
Yeah.
We have to think about spread and contagion and things like that. So that's what happens now that I wish I didn't have to deal with. I mean, we all were, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So creeping levels of anxiety are what I could do without. So it's actually something that has added that I wish I could drop, as opposed to something that I had to drop, which I could add back.
Yeah. I do miss having places that I could go in the wintertime that were like not in my house. So like I used to be able to take my kids to a couple of like indoor play spaces and stuff nearby that obviously, like even if they were still open, I would not be availing myself of those opportunities at all.
Well, that's the problem. You're saying obviously. I think the problem is it's not obvious to everyone.
That's true.
And that's the anxiety. That's the the rub. The reason that we're having to have those ideas or thoughts anyway.
Yeah. Like, I think it feels like you're driving on New Year's Eve every day. Like you expect a certain number of people to be drunk all the time. There's like certain people out there who have no concern for your safety or well-being because they think they've got it all together, and they may or may not. But it's just that anxiety of, I don't know if I can trust all these people I don't know.
Well, I think it's more apt than maybe you're even letting on, because the other part about driving on New Year's Eve is that law enforcement is out more than they would normally be. They're already looking. So you, who are not drunk, hopefully, you are driving around as well, but then you're also extra paranoid about anything that you might be doing wrong, even if so you can't even be relaxed and be like, well, I know I'm not drunk. You have to be like, oh, I know I'm not drunk, and am I 2 miles over the speed limit? Because I mean, they're looking for anything.
Exactly.
I can't even look back at the kids to make sure no one's like throwing anything at themselves, like back in the back of the van. Because if I take my eyes off and I drift just a little bit, this would be the night that I get pulled over for this thing. So it's no thanks. No thanks.
And also all those people denying that New Year's Eve is even a thing.
Yeah, like I always drink this much. I don't have a problem.
So it's my right for today to be New Year's again.
Yeah,
you're infringing on my rights to celebrate.
I identify as every night being New Year's Eve.
Exactly,
so, and that's my freedom.
What year are you up to now? Have you caught up to Blade Runner?
Well, the years never actually 2049. What was the first Blade Runner in? Wasn't it like, didn't it already happen? What, in like 20?
Probably. I know there was a series, like a quick chunk of years there where it was like Back to the Future and Blade Runner and like I mean, obviously 2000 Space, all that kind of stuff. It was like just back to back to back there.
I feel bad that I don't know when it happened the first time. I mean, I guess it couldn't have been that. Maybe it's 2029 or something like that.
I feel like there was like a real-time gap in between the first Blade Runner and 2049. So like...
so how old did Harrison Ford age between those two?
I'm just going to look it up. Is this 2019? No, wait. It was set in November 2019.
Oh, goodness.
There you go. I thought so.
That was, impact to the world about the same time.
I just like all the New Year's posts that are like, just a reminder, this is how we're supposed to dress this year or whatever. And it shows, the 2015 Back to the Future Hill Valley styles. Like, you gotta have your sleeves all the way like a foot past your hands and stuff.
Have them all accordion up for you in those magnetic laces. So you're
just dressing like my kids dress. Got it.
Right. Exactly.
You have some impact on that, so I don't know if you can just blame your kids on that one.
Well, yeah, it's what's available to them. Yeah. So we love giving them the freedom to dress. I say reasonably. Reasonably only being like for safety purposes, not for style purposes. Right. Not letting them go out with no shoes on and ice or something like that. But we love giving them the freedom to have their own style. I guess it is us because they can still only wear the clothes that they have available to them. So that's where we step in.
Right.
Okay.
Let's see. So 2020. So what's funny to me is that, I mean, I don't think it's a secret now. I think we tried to express this in a couple different forums, that doing the podcast at the end of 2019, well, even during 2019, and especially at the beginning of 2020 was something that was overwhelming for me.
Yeah.
And then it worked out because I had some very kind people in my life telling me that it's okay to take a break from a thing, and that the world will continue. They're like, nothing's going to happen to the world if you stop doing real world
And
theology.
we found out what happened.
And I was like, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I also realized that, 2020, we're having like elections, insurrections, global pandemics, but the thing that really was killing people was real world theology not being there.
I mean, one of my coping mechanisms was podcasts. I even devolved into reaction YouTube videos because there was such a lack of you podcasting. So I don't know what to tell you other than I'm tracking 100%.
People would say, "Oh my gosh, how are you coping through this time?" And I would hear people say, like, "I just don't know." Not being able to hear Fizz's voice on a multi-month, and they're like, "No, I'm talking about COVID." And they're like, "Oh,
COVID,
yeah,
I forgot.
COVID, yeah."
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's bad too.
So your sabbatical, it ended up being a bit longer than expected.
Yeah, it ended up being, at first it ended up being kind of like ironically timely, right? We're like, okay, I'll just take a sabbatical. When you do any kind of ministry, and I don't want to be too uppity about this, but like to a degree, this is a ministry of sorts. It's like a service, and you hit a certain year, and you get your sabbatical. And I think it was right at 7 years of doing the podcast, because I think Real World Theology started in 2012, and then the podcast started later, like right at the end of that year or mid that year. And so it had been right at 7 years. So we were like, all right, based on Jesus, I can stop doing this for a little while. And then at first it was like, well, nothing's coming out, nothing's coming to the theater. Good time to take a break, right?
It's even more accurate than you think. Actually, you published your first article on the site in February 2013.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So it was like it had been 7 years. It made sense to take a break, and like I said, and I think the thing that I want people to take away from it is that I love doing it. I love podcasting. I love talking about movies, but it was hard because I felt pressure on myself, but I really do feel lucky. I had more than one person, David, obviously you were one of them, who encouraged me to like rest. And rest isn't something that we usually take a lot of value in.
Right.
And I used to think that I was a big proponent of rest. I was like, I don't understand why people don't take their Sabbaths. People don't rest, or they don't realize that rest isn't like what you do at the end. Rest is a part of being spiritually healthy.
Yeah.
And knowing this, I took it to every theater except for Real World Theology. And yeah, it was really awesome. And if you're listening to this and you don't have people in your life who can tell you hard things, then that's not good. You need people who can say, like, it's okay. Because that was for my mental and spiritual and physical health at that point. It was good to hear. It was necessary. But it was a bummer. I mean, and again, global pandemic. That was also a bummer.
Right.
So it was
like real world burnout, and then like right here is like pandemic, global pandemic. Like just,
well, I mean, like spacebar.
Right. Right. Yes. Exactly.
So. Yeah. But yeah, it was good. It was good. Again, we didn't expect it to last quite as long, and then you get into new routines and things in life change, and it gets harder to get to do something once you get out of the habit. Diets, exercise always being the examples.
Right.
It gets hard to get back in once you kind of fall out of that routine, even if falling out of routine is necessary.
Right. Yep.
So.
Yeah, and I mean, like, all of this was sort of, you having your sabbatical was sort of predicated upon the rest of us picking up some slack, right? And then, like, I lost my job before the pandemic, but then everybody else also lost their jobs or changed jobs or like had more work to do at their jobs or whatever, and that just basically wrecked the whole plan of everything. So it's been a time. We never intended to be out this long, but I'm excited to be talking about it again.
Yeah, even if it's basically trying to make up for lost time, right? Talking about things that we never got to talk about before, even if it's briefly.
Right.
So, not quite the evergreen content that we usually put out, but
Yeah, more time specific this time.
Yeah.
Right.
Time capsule.
Yep. Well, hey, let's start our reboot. I mean, every good intellectual property has to have a reboot. So what is next for Real World Theology?
That's a great question. So much so that I'm not sure if you have an answer, and you're just or you don't have an answer, and you're hoping that I do. I'll say exactly what I've said to other Real World Theology, both staff and interested parties. I no longer, in the way that my life is structured with the age of my children and the demands of my current job, which I love very much, have the margin to try to be like a one-man show.
Yeah.
There were things I loved about that format. There were things I loved about being the host and on every episode and trying to wrangle new people in and have new circles in almost every month. But that helped us grow. It helped us grow real fast. But I don't have the capacity for that, and I have to know that now, right? I have to. Even doing this, even talking to you guys just for a short amount of time today, I'm already excited about talking about film more,
right?
And being like, maybe I can do that, and being like, no, stop it, stop it. So I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. I'm hoping that our concerted efforts, the striving of a dedicated few, will help the podcast exist in some way.
Yeah.
I don't think we really have our finger on what that's going to look like.
No.
Or what that schedule is going to be. But I know consistency is important to people. You don't want to be like the Mars Hill podcast and post whenever you want. You're just going to get hate mail all the time.
2-hour episodes every 3 months or whatever.
Yeah. Every whenever. I know consistency makes people feel comfortable, and that's what I would love. But we don't know what that's going to be like yet. I think we have a pretty good plan in place behind the scenes to get content out.
Yeah. And to sort of dual goals of getting content out and also being patient with ourselves and being kind to ourselves and gentle with ourselves about hey, we're figuring all this out as we go, but we're not going to kill ourselves or wreck our families trying to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's important.
Right. Yeah.
Sarcasm. I think David. I mean, like I said, I don't want to try to spill some kind of beans, because I don't think there's a lot of beans to be spilt.
No,
but
there are no beans.
I think there's some things in place, and so it may begin to be rewarding again to visit the actual site for written content. I think that if nothing else, there will be some developing consistency to audio content. And if things go well and we get connected to the right people, or enough people get a spark or a fire lit under them, then maybe we are able to do something like move into a visual space, YouTube, or we start putting out the Twitch videos like kids are wanting to do, because it do be like that sometimes. But I don't know. I don't want to like I said, I don't want to put the cart before the horse. So,
well, and I think the call to action here is, halfway through this episode, is we need help. If you are interested in being a part of this, if you're interested in writing or being on the podcast, and you feel like you've got something to say about faith and film, let us know.
Yeah. But I'd even expand it like one, hopefully just one ring wider than that. I think if you have a passion about faith and culture,
Yeah.
whether
Yeah.
it's specifically about film or TV, the written word,
Video games.
anywhere that, video games, anywhere that if your
Yep.
faith engages with that, then I think someone would like to have a conversation with you.
Yes.
Because we have resources still, even though they have been dormant. And one of us would love to have a conversation with you. So I'm sure there's a way, probably via Twitter, to reach out to us. And
Twitter or email or all this stuff is going to be in the description for this episode. So just click on whatever link happens to be below and let us know.
So that's where we've been, huh?
Yeah, and that's where we're going.
What are we doing? What are we doing today, Ryan?
What are we doing today? Well, let me tell
Same
you.
thing we do every day, Pinky.
So we're gonna kind of like skim across whatever our COVID-addled brains can remember. You've heard of brain fog from COVID and things like that. I got a greetings card that told me to have a happy, healthy 2020 this year. Well, last year for Christmas last year. We're into a new year. So it's 2022, just to clear everything up for everybody listening. But we're going to try and remember what 2020, what we watched, what we did, that sort of thing. Just kind of skimming the surface. Just, like I say, it probably won't be very precise and we're still trying to remember. We have looked through a few lists and things, and we're trying to say, well, was that 2019? Was that last week? Was that 2020? What was where? So we're just going to kind of skim through, do a highlights reel, a Sports Center kind of thing. Top 20 best plays of the year if we can remember them. So, and it's going to be probably a short list because, frankly, we weren't going out to the theaters too much, and even if you did, there wasn't a lot there. Like Tenet, that was postponed how many times? Because they're like, oh, we're gonna find an in. We're gonna find an in. We're gonna release it, right? See, this is gonna go to zero anytime now. And they released it, and they're like, oh, people don't care about cinema anymore. Personally, I just watched it for this episode just to go back. I was like, I love Christopher Nolan. I've been meaning to watch that one. Oh, my library has it. I'll finally get it to watch it. I'm going to say I wasn't disappointed I didn't go see it in theaters.
I'm sorry for your loss.
I wouldn't have been like, oh man, it was so much better on the big... I mean, my thing with Tenet, just to go through it real quick, is just, it felt like indulgent director cinema. It was, okay, you've done Dark Knight, you've done Inception, do whatever you want. We don't care. Right. And it had great scenes, like the jet plane crushing everything as it's heading to the building, the fire truck thing, going into the car and whatnot. Like, it had great, practical, expensive looking scenes, but it just... The protagonist's name was Protagonist, and he didn't change throughout the whole thing. And then their whole gimmick with, knowing what's going to happen in the fight made it look like it was practice choreography as opposed to an actual fight scene. So I had to pause like halfway through to stay awake because I was like, okay, it's just droning on and on and on. It feels very one note. Went back to it after. I was like, yeah. I feel like he had more fun planning it, like charting it out on the whiteboard and coming up with all these ideas and whatnot, than actually the movie made the audience feel. And I feel like that, and then they got a lot of flack for the audio on that one, right? He just pumped up the music to where you couldn't hear the dialogue. So,
like, I thought it was a mistake.
Yeah,
frankly. I don't mean like I disagree with the decision. Like, I mean, I literally thought my Blu-ray had a problem with it, and it was. I called it like if brutalist architecture had CGI. It seemed like one of those low-slung concrete buildings with no windows, just all the way through. I think a lot of people were talking about it being amazing and really great, and I think that was just about like it was the only movie you saw in 2020 in theaters, so that's why you loved it.
That can be. That can be.
I mean, I feel like for listeners of the podcast who can think back far enough to any Nolan film that we've reviewed in the past couple of years, I have a very low opinion of Christopher Nolan right now, or I've had for some time. Like when you say it seems self-indulgent, I was like, well, you already said it was directed by Christopher Nolan. I mean, I know we don't want to spend an entire episode bagging on Christopher Nolan again, which is I think what I did last time. I think we did like Dunkirk, and I think I just did the same thing. All the problems that you just mentioned about Tenet are the same problems that I had with Dunkirk and Interstellar. Like,
and I haven't seen either of those. Like,
it's a bunch of characters that are stand-in. They are placeholders for emotions or ideas instead of actual, real, rounded people. I mean, Tenet was cool. I get that there is a dearth of original ideas in most cinematic years, right? So you get lots of retreads, you get sequels, you get prequels, you get a story that you get Hallmark Christmas as like an entire season now. Which, I mean, I have really no problem if people are super into that. I mean, because there's lots of movies that I know exactly what's going to happen and I still enjoy. So it's not about not enjoying or not enjoying it, but I get why when something is so out of left field, it seems smarter than it really is. Usually when people ask me, people don't ask anymore because people have kind of already forgot about Tenet, which I think is actually more indicting than anything that we could say.
Right.
But at the time when people were asking me if I had seen it, the best thing that I could tell people was the best part about Tenet was the fact that it produced the Screen Rant pitch meeting about Tenet, which is perfect because it starts off. It's like, so we start out with our protagonist. He's like, yeah, what's his name? Protagonist. Yeah. What's his name? Protagonist. And then it just kind of that's the bottom. It only goes uphill from there. And it's hilarious. I'm glad I saw the movie just because that was so incredible.
Oh yeah.
And when we talk about things that we did watch during the pandemic, I mean, I think I watched every pitch meeting.
Yeah.
That's my point, right? Like every pitch meeting video that that guy makes.
Ryan George.
They're almost always the exact same format. You know what you're going to get. He gets his catchphrases in. He knows what people want to see. He knows what I want to see. And delivers every time, even though I know what's coming.
Hey, that's from The Thing.
Super easy. Barely an inconvenience.
Yeah, I mean, so like I don't have, like I said, I have no problem with something that's repetitive. I mean, and I love the fact that there was new stuff. I think actually 2020, if anything, gave us a little more space for unique movies because we weren't so inundated with blockbusters. It's just that I don't necessarily think that there were some of the highs there that we used to get.
And that's what you get with more experimentation. Is you're going to have some misses. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
You're allowing that out.
Well, and I mean, let's just talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe there, because I think that honestly, after having landed the plane with Endgame in 2019, I think probably the best possible thing that could have happened to the Marvel Cinematic Universe was no movies at all in 2020. Just having their entire slate swept in 2020. Because do what?
Took a bow and let it sit.
Yeah, right, exactly. Let that moment breathe a lot, because then we come back for WandaVision in early 2021, and this is not a 2021 podcast, but it just has a much different feel to it because we've had that year off, right? We've had, we had Endgame, and then we had Spider-Man Far From Home, and then nothing for a year and a half, and that was. Allowing as much as I love Marvel, allowing it this year, or last year.
It got pushed,
right?
So it was supposed to come out in 2020.
Okay,
right.
Yeah.
But it was pushed to mid this year.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so because we didn't have all of that stuff sort of pressing in on us, we were able to have that for the first time since, gosh, the Lord of the Rings, the Star Wars prequel trilogy, we had like actual anticipation for a new property like that. Like that was awesome to be able to sort of anticipate this coming out and seeing the billboards and being like, I can't wait for that to come out, rather than just being like, oh well, we just watched the last episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I guess we'll go see Black Widow now. Like it was just one after the other. Like, but having that year of decompressing. So I guess that my entry into the conversation here is a thing that did not come out in 2020, namely Marvel movies.
Yeah.
So, Ryan, what was 2020 like for you as a whole? When it comes to watching film, I mean,
yeah. Yeah. So I definitely got more into the streaming platforms. I wasn't ready or willing to go out to theaters to go see anything. So when they said, hey, if you get Disney Plus, we're going to start putting those to that, I was like, okay, that's good. I can finally start catching up on some stuff. But I did a lot of just like regular YouTube channels I kind of dabbled in or whatever. I got more into their backlog and things like that and hammered out, oh, this is somebody I wanted to actually watch more regularly or not at all. But then, yeah, miniseries, stuff like that, The Great, The Witcher, those kind of things was primarily my diet, as it were, during that time.
So how about you, David? What was 2020 in the movie realm for you like?
I was looking, I pulled up my letterbox for the year 2020, and just looking through all of that, I did not see anything in theaters in 2020. I saw a movie that came out in 2020 in theaters, but I saw it this year, and that was Electric Jesus, which is really, really fun and really funny. And when that comes to a friendly local indie movie theater near you, or on Blu-ray or whatever, you should definitely watch it. It was a lot of fun. It's about an 80s Christian hair metal band, and it's a lot. It's got shades of That Thing You Do, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really enjoyable watch. Got Brian Baumgartner from The Office. Fun film. Anyway, that was the only thing that I saw in theaters that came out in 2020, but I didn't even see it in 2020. So, the other stuff was a lot of TV, like Brian was saying. Like I saw a lot of. I did watch The Great. I watched Picard, Star Trek Picard. That was in 2020. Watched Space Force. That's supposed to get a second season this year. That'd be cool. So it was a lot of fun to be able to really dig into long form TV stuff, because that's always been something that I've really been a fan of. Movies are great, but I really like the long form stuff where you can just sort of live in a story for a while. So I was really enjoying that. I never got Apple TV, so I never did watch Ted Lasso, which I realize is a very large gap in my my consumption.
With it's like a 3-week or 1 month. What is it, like a free trial now? Now's the time.
I believe it. Yeah,
free trial it, get it out of the. Get it done.
I probably should. Sooner rather than later. So that was my 2020. I watched Enola Holmes, which was a cute little thing. Before Real World shut down, I got to see a screener for Greyhound, which was an Apple TV thing that had Tom Hanks, and it was interesting. There was an article about it on the website. So I guess I don't know that necessarily fits what we're trying to do here. What did you guys think of Onward? That was sort of the first film to really be impacted by the pandemic. The Pixar film about the elf characters.
The elf characters. Did you see it, Ryan?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was a better Pixar / Disney outing than I was used to getting for a bit, but at the same time with Tom Holland and Chris Pratt, I think they could have done a lot better.
Which Chris?
Which Chris is it? But I liked it. especially with the oversaturation and overpopular reaction to Frozen around that time, I was like, oh, I think what people feel about Frozen, I feel in Onward more. Just it was more affecting to me than Frozen's story. It felt like it tried to earn that ending, and it hit pretty good at the end there with the younger brother dynamic. Like I was like, oh, that, because there were parts in there that I was like, okay, that bit didn't really work out, or that didn't make me laugh like it should have, or things like that. But at the end, I was like, okay, I'm still glad I spent the time to watch this.
Yeah, I think my wife and I have an ongoing joke now where she'll, like, if I get to see anything that she didn't get to see, she'll be like, how did you like it? And I'll be like, well, I'll put it this way. It was like this, and this, and then dad stuff. And if they put dad stuff in a movie, she knows that I was crying. So Onward was a movie that I watched, and I was like, oh, this is fine. This is fine. And then at the end, I'm like, dad stuff, tears.
Yeah. Right.
I've learned to temper my star ratings a little bit based on that, because I realize I cry during like every movie now, it feels like.
Right.
Actually, one of the best examples of this, not to talk about 2021 films, but I watched 8-Bit Christmas, the HBO Max film that just came out with Neil Patrick Harris. Looked like it's supposed to be like a my generation version of A Christmas Story kind of deal. And I was like, this is not good. This is not. I'm sure there's people that enjoy it. Like I was not enjoying it very much at all. It felt very slapdash. And then like the last like 6 or 7 minutes of the film was like dad stuff. And I'm like, oh, dad stuff. I'm crying. Why am I crying during this movie that I have not enjoyed? Yeah. And so it felt like peak that. But I felt like that Onward kind of feels how I feel about most of 2020. Like a whole bunch of movies that they're fine. They're fine. And the ones that I think did get more headlines than others, I don't necessarily think they were the cream of the crop. I went and looked up, because time is just a construct right now, right? Like we don't. What year is it? Yeah. I had to go back and look. I did look at my Letterboxd. I apparently logged, which I know I did a very terrible job in 2020. So there's probably a little bit more in this. I logged 67 films. Okay. In 2020. There's not all new films. We did a couple things with some friends where we all virtually watched older films. It's kind of like movie clubs and stuff, because we all thought the pandemic was going to last like 6 months. So I logged 67 films, and I realized I'm almost positive the only film that I saw in theaters in 2020 was right before the pandemic, and it was Birds of Prey. Oh yeah, the Harley Quinn movie. So 2020, like that's the only movie I saw in theaters in 2020. So there was, that was like obviously. Well, I say obviously. It's not surprising to me that I was not in a rush to get back, right? Based on the mediocrity of that film, but I did look. Like I said, I looked up the Academy Awards, which also made things confusing because they allowed a whole bunch of stuff from the beginning of 2021, right? Right. And the best animated feature nominations from 2020 were Soul, Onward, Over the Moon, which I believe was a Netflix movie. A Shaun the Sheep movie, Farmageddon, and an Apple TV movie, Wolfwalkers. And I will say, so Soul, Soul won the Academy Award, which wasn't terribly surprising based on some of the feedback that it got. But I would say that Soul was probably third on my list of movies. Because as much as we want to laugh about it, I haven't seen a Shaun the Sheep movie that I haven't thoroughly enjoyed. And I feel like a great indicator is my kids love rewatching it. Right. And probably my favorite was Wolfwalkers, a film that almost no one saw because no one had really picked up Apple TV yet. Right. And it had very little kind of, outside of the few people that saw it, had very little buzz, very little momentum behind it. But now that people have mostly subscribed to go watch Ted Lasso, hopefully people are getting to see it more. So I feel like when I saw a good movie, no one else saw it. That's how I feel about 2020. And I don't want to make it sound like a humbrag or anything, but I get sent a lot of movies at the end of the year, right? Like if I wasn't a part of a critics film association that actively sent me stuff, 2020 would have been a very dry year. Yeah. Because very little got me excited to want to spend 2 hours, usually at the end of a long, exhausted day, watching a film, right? And outside of everything that was kind of crammed into December and early January that had technically come out in 2020, I didn't really see a lot. It's not till November, December that my letterbox really kicks up. And I'm kind of curious if you guys saw any or got to catch any of the Best Picture nominees, because if you're gonna start anywhere, it's right there. And the Best Picture nominees for 2020, obviously Nomadland won Best Picture. There was The Father, Judas and the Black Messiah, which didn't actually come out until I think February of 2021. Mank, which is a Netflix movie, Minari, Promising Young Woman, The Sound of Metal, and The Trial of the Chicago 7. Those were the ones that got picked as like the best 2020 had to offer.
Wow. I think honestly, this is the first time that I can say I have seen none of those movies.
And
none of
I've seen one nominated. Because we said we might talk about it, which I'm glad I did. Promising Young Woman definitely can get a recommendation. But yeah, I had some of those hit my radar, especially the ones on Netflix there, and I just again, it's like a lot of those that get put up for those awards are already heavy topic type things, and it's like, I got enough heavy around me. I don't really need to escape into somebody else's version of heavy a lot. It helps with catharsis sometimes, but it's just like not been what I've been itching to go out and seek out, kind of a thing. That's for sure.
Well, it's interesting to me. So we talk about the typically film itself. We say this film dealt with this issue, and as Christians, this is kind of where we would come from when we deal with that issue, or how we could see we have some answers for this, or we have similar questions for this. And again, like the tag usually says, we're trying not to just watch just for escapism. But if there was a year, in our lifetimes where escapism actually felt more valid than it ever has to me before, 2020 felt like it. And instead of talking about, because again, most of these films are not light. Right. There's not a lot of raucous laughter in Nomadland. I can tell you from having watched it. Judas and the Black Messiah, even though it's a 2021 film, for our purposes, was not light. Minari was hard to watch at times because of how difficult it was for the characters. The Sound of Metal, the same way. The Trial of the Chicago 7 was not a pick-me-up, even though it had some of that Aaron Sorkin humor in it. And the movie that we've both seen, Promising Young Woman, while it was probably my favorite film of 2020, again, not an upper.
No. Right. And even not an upper. Like even watching it, like it had like these end caps where they were trying to like ease in a little bit, like it was kind of funny, like a dramedy almost, but it just was like, that almost made it more cringe. Like it just kind of made you more uneasy than it gave you permission to laugh, because there was just no laughing matter within it, kind of a deal.
Yeah. Whereas things are so tough that you have to laugh, or else you have to turn it off because you realize the gravity of it. Which I think is one of the strengths of the film, being able to kind of not silly, but kind of keep things off balance enough so you're not mired in like how truly disturbing and intense the film is. And I remember talking to my wife about it, and she was like, it's one of those movies that you don't necessarily want to go back and watch, but you can't, even days later, it leaves an impression with you.
Yeah.
And that was much different than most of the other films on the list. And I mean, there are some that I never got around to just because, like I said, life was tough. I mean, like it's tough in a lot of ways, but I'm just not ready. I don't have the emotional reserves.
Now, the one thing I will say about Promising Young Woman that you can't say about all difficult movies to watch is the nuance that they put in there about the topic. Because if you're going for a movie that's about sexism, discrimination against gender, rape culture, all these sort of things, it can be very one note flat, and that way certain people can just high-five it to the moon and other people can just dismiss it at the same time. This took each scene and it like addressed a different person's point of view, a different person's perspective on the issue. It's like, oh, but what about the women? What are the women doing? And it's like, some of them are making it worse. Some of them are helping. It just depends. Yeah. Some of them, even though they're a woman, doesn't mean they understand the situation. They need it to hit home with them too. Not all men are evil. Not all the nice guys are nice guys. And they definitely hit that one a few times. But I will say that was in the middle. It was the best scene I've seen of empathy, repentance, confession, and forgiveness. I have never seen a scene hit that so well. And it's especially poignant right now as, I forget who the guy's name is. He was a guy in the network of John Piper who recently was talking about empathy being almost a sin or unchristian.
Yeah. Not almost. He literally said the sin of empathy.
Yes, the sin of empathy. And it's like, if I could just encapsulate that scene, just send it to him as a response to why he's dead wrong and what good empathy can do, that would be it. That's what I would do in response to that. So definitely high recommendations for that one, not for the kids. And there are plenty of trigger warnings you could throw up for that.
Well, that's the thing, right? So if you did send that to someone who would hold an opinion as such, then chances are they'd be like, I'm not going to watch this. It's rated R. But you get the same nuance about that as their opinion on empathy. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. Like, there's so many films that have come out in the past 2 years that are directly or indirectly addressing. Gosh, culture's just been so hard. Like, there have been so many people putting their feet in their mouth. There have been so many people just saying incredibly divisive and dumb things. I mean, I would say that depending on who you are and how you've reached this podcast, you may see us as perpetrators of this as well, because I've definitely not held my tongue too much on people not taking a global pandemic very seriously, but it's just film typically, I would say historically, has united people. It has crossed barrier. Like the medium of entertainment has allowed what good liturgy does, right? It allows people who are diametrically opposed in some kind of belief or social ideology to sit next to each other and affirm the same things. That is why going to the theaters up until recently, like, has almost been like a liturgical thing. You go, you sit next to people that you would never sit next to. You have a shared experience. You come away with lots of the same ideas, whether you're fully on board or not on board with them, but you're exposing yourself to these stories, which are going to impact you in some way, because story is powerful.
And that sounds familiar.
Yeah, right. It's our catchphrase. So we get to be like, hey, that's from that podcast.
Yeah.
And always try to slip it in. You'd think it would be hard, but it's super easy, barely inconvenience. And when we get to that point, that's when we get to have these amazing conversations. And it's one of the things that I've missed over the past 2 years. And if I could be so bold, because I know I've already talked a lot, which usually mostly flows out of the fact that by circumstance only, I have seen a lot of the stuff that came out in 2020, as sparse as it was. I started to have these thoughts towards the end of 2020 and most of 2021, thinking the reviews that we started doing on Real World Theology about movies, about how people were coming together, about a lot of these shared themes, I noticed we were repeating ourselves a lot of the time.
Yeah.
We were saying, oh, this film's about this. This film's about this. Oh, this new film, it's about that same thing that we just talked about 2 weeks ago. Or, hey, this film's about, we've already talked about this idea 3 or 4 times this year. And I realized that going through the 2018, right? 20, whenever the election was, going through that election cycle, going through like insurrection, going through a shared global trauma of a pandemic, as opposed to most of our films being superhero films or reactionary to living in a smaller world, post 9/11 influenced kind of thing. Most of our films are going to start be about people trying to work out communal trauma. This is trauma like stemmed from like George Floyd. We've already seen some of these movies, right? The trauma from being trapped in your house, trauma from being separated from family because of either physical distance or ideological difference. The pain and loss of losing 1 million people to a pandemic, right? Yeah. Like these are the topics that I think we're going to start gradually see people trying to work out through their art.
Yeah.
Which actually makes it really exciting to kind of jump back in.
Yeah.
After taking a little bit of a break, having talked about the same narrative themes for 7 years, the world has changed, and not just slightly changed; it's dramatically changed. And I think our art's going to reflect that. And very, very interested to see what we're talking about regularly, like what things and how they're dealt with. That's exciting to me.
Yeah.
Agreed. And I think that the opportunities here for sort of looking at things differently, like since we've identified how much polarization there is and how many people sort of think that the world is only one of 2 ways and that's all there is, that's all the differences there are, I think good art is going to have to start drawing out the greater number of differences. The fact that we are not only divided, like there are not only these 2 different sides on every single issue. There are a multitude of different sides on most issues, and being able to draw those out and draw out who everybody is and what we're all doing, that's a very redemptive work that I think people are going to be going to have to do if they want to make good art, and I'm looking forward to that a lot.
Well, one last thing that I'll say, and I think we've touched on this a little bit. Maybe Ryan, you were talking about this, that I want to give a big shout out. I want to give daps. I want to give big ups. I don't know what people give people anymore. I'll have to go ask the kids on the Twitch,
internet points,
or on the TikTok. That's it. Ask kids on the TikTok. Like TV is better than it's ever been. I mean, again, I know I've mentioned this before, but it's also worse than it's ever been. But like for the most part, it's better than it's always been. It's better than it's ever been. There's so many things that I think are worth your time. There's lots of stuff that are not worth your time, but people are incredibly popular anyway. But I remember 2020 being indoors, feeling like we couldn't really go anywhere. A lot of movies not being released, usually because they were being delayed, because they were hoping for a theatrical release. That didn't stop TV. And there were a number of excellent shows that came out in 2020 that, I mean, we've already mentioned Ted Lasso. I was like a mid adopter. Like I wasn't a late adopter, because I think we saw it right before the end of 2020. We waited till like the first season ended. And I mean, Ted Lasso is now one of my favorite shows that I've ever seen. I want to do almost an entire podcast, but not that you can't find literally an infinite number of YouTube videos breaking down the uniqueness of a show like Ted Lasso. But I think we got another season of The Boys, which I enjoy and don't recommend to most people probably listening to this. I remember my wife and sister-in-law were watching Bridgerton. Again, can't recommend for content reasons.
Right.
But was incredibly popular. I think The Good Place ended.
That I think that might have been 2019, but yeah, that is notable.
So right at the end of 2019, we had a bunch of stuff released or finished. Like The Witcher came out at the end of 2019, and most people kind of picked up on it like right there at the beginning of 2020.
Yeah.
So you had a bunch of memes and gifs of tossing coins to Witchers.
Yes.
And,
Don't throw any coins at Henry Cavill. He does not like that.
Yeah. No. But because I remember I went to one of the last things I did before things were shut down is I had a conference I had to go to in early January, and I didn't know if my wife would like the show. So I started watching The Witcher on the plane ride, and I finished it before I got home.
Oh, man.
I was up till like 2 or 3 a.m. every night watching it because I was like, I need to know what happens next. And then watched the whole thing again with my wife when I got home. So we didn't get that until early 2020, like right as at the beginning of pandemic stuff. One of the first things that was a big pandemic thing was everyone watching Tiger King. Again, can't recommend it. Kind of watch it like a 10 episode arc of Jerry Springer or something like that. But I mean, but it was in the collective conscious, you know. Couldn't get away from it.
I mean, that is one of the unique things about 2020 is that we were all kind of watching maybe not the same things, but we were all watching very similar things, you know. Because we were all sitting at home, and so like when everybody was like waiting for Hamilton to come out, and then it shows up on Disney Plus, and everybody talks about Hamilton for a month and a half, which is an excellent show, and like it's totally understandable why it has been sold out for the past 6 years or whatever.
Yeah, I was so excited for that to come out too, because I had avoided all the music and stuff because I was like, I don't want to listen to the soundtrack unless let's see what's going on. Remember, we watched it. I think we watched it that night. It came out like right on July 4th or something like that. And I think the first night it came out, we stayed up late and watched that, and was like, okay, yeah, I get it.
Yeah,
I get it.
And there's a lot of stuff, like the casting of King George as an abusive boyfriend is just a brilliant turn. I loved the production value of that particular recording of it too. It just being able to sort of feel like you're almost on stage with them the whole time. It doesn't take away from the fact that it's a recording, that it's a Broadway thing, but it really makes you feel like you're there. So like rather than it just seeming like somebody stuck a camera in the audience, like it really feels like you're actually present with the performers, and it was a lot of fun to watch. So, well,
I want to. I guess I'll shout out a couple things real quick. Having seen a number of things in 2020, despite the fickleness of the year, I remember really enjoying Emma, the Jane Austen film with Anna Taylor-Joy. It came out right before the pandemic, and it ended up being one of my favorite movies of the year. Me and my wife's one of our favorite movies of the year. I think it was when we realized that Netflix really, really wanted to win more awards because they then came out with like Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which we also really enjoyed. It was very comical watching the Oscars with them so confident that Chadwick Boseman was going to win the supporting actor award, which I think, or the best leading actor, which I guess I haven't seen The Father, so I don't know, but I wish he would have won because that movie was incredible. And Minari, we haven't really mentioned Minari, but Minari I think is also worth your time. It's probably not like many movies that you're going to have a chance to see. It is kind of tough to watch in parts because it is so serious and like life is just hard. But it was also great, and it was nice to see Steven Yeun. I want to see Yeun kind of get some time to shine outside of The Walking Dead and really prove that he had the chops, because he was starting to show up in everything for us that year. So, Palm Springs was great. Hulu movie. Comedy, kind of had the Groundhog thing, Groundhog Day premise. So it wasn't, anything wholly unique, but it was, it ended up being one of the year's best. Maybe because the year was a little sparse, but still great, rewarding film. So, it's not completely skippable, but it was a little bit of a. There are a lot of good movies, but there are like not really a whole lot of movies that I would consider great. Like when I go back and do like a best of the decade, 2020 is probably not gonna really offer a whole lot to that list. Well, at least I hope not, because it'd be pretty bad for the next 9 years. So not like previous years. We got like movies like Blade Runner 2049, things that are going to be like on my all-time list.
Yeah.
Buster Scruggs, things that like I felt like I was blown away by. I wasn't really totally blown away by anything in 2020.
Yeah, TV shows though, there were definitely some highlights. Queen's Gambit and like you said, those streaming miniseries, they just keep stepping up the level. Mandalorian and such,
Right.
I've kind of liked the MCU shows better than I was liking some of the actual movies for a while there. So it's definitely kind of changing the space. As soon as Disney saw that, people aren't buying our cable channel bundled with everything else, and decided, hey, everyone's stuck inside with Netflix, let's get in on that. It was ready to bulldoze everything, taking Hulu with them, kind of a deal. Oh, and Hulu's had some good ones. I think more recent ones that I've got in my memory, besides the great. But
yeah, and we can talk about 2021 in the next episode.
To be continued.
Right. Yeah, and there's some other things too that are worth noting. Star Trek debuted Lower Decks, which is their first animated movie or animated TV show since 1970 something, and there's also Upload, which was from one of the guys that did The Office, and was really kind of. I don't feel like it stuck the landing, but it was an interesting premise at least. We had a lot of talk about death over the past couple of years, so the afterlife in particular, I guess. So like Upload followed on the heels of The Good Place, and that just seems like a really interesting thing to note there. But yeah, overall, I think I agree with you. It was a that happened sort of year. And I think with most movie theater or movie studios wanting to sort of hold off on stuff that they didn't think was going to do well in hopes that it would do well in 2021, which then of course it didn't. But I mean, as we talk about the subsequent time in cinema, I think probably we'll come to maybe some more concrete observations about what the theme over the past couple of years is. But I'm intrigued at how, like, even though we saw different films and different TV shows, like all three of our experiences have been generally the same. And I do, I wonder how much of that is like the stuff we saw, or if it's just like our particular way of approaching it. Because like the culture that we're in informs how we experience the thing. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Like how has your independent of what you watched, how has like the way that you've watched the stuff affected your experience of culture in 2020?
Yeah, I do think what you bring to the table makes a world of difference.
Yeah.
And your personal life experiences, even leading up to that, more than just the immediate, which is why some people, there are movies they just can't watch, because
Right.
it's just a subject matter or a situation or something that has just affected them too much. But I remember even this year, we went to go to the theater when we thought it was okay. We still had our masks. We were like one of two people, well, two couples that were in there. The other ones were way in the back. We were way in the front, kind of a deal. But it was like, I did not enjoy the experience. And I knew in the back of my head, I enjoyed the movie more than I enjoyed the experience, kind of thing. I was like, I was too tired. I was too stressed. I couldn't focus. I couldn't engage with the movie. It's like being in a conversation with someone that you know and love, that you're friends with, and it's like, I'm going cross-eyed just trying to listen to you right now. It's just, I can't do it. And so there was plenty of times where it's like, I'm slung over the couch or something like that, and it's like, just put some noise on to just have noise, kind of a thing. And I like The Witcher. That was kind of the weirdest one, because I did watch that right at when it came out, but I was sick. I don't know with what. I didn't know to go check for anything else that might have been floating around. But my instinct was to stay home anyway, because I'm at a chiropractic office working very close proximity with people, and I know how old and frail some of them are. I'm like, I don't want to breathe this on you guys and cause any problems. Before that was more in the cultural consciousness then. But I was just like sick as a dog there, just kind of trying to find a comfortable spot on the couch, but still pretty much just streamed right through that whole thing with my wife, and I was like, that was pretty good. There's some uncomfortable scenes we can't recommend that to too many people for, but overall, it's like, that's what I wish Game of Thrones was like, I guess. I could not get into Game of Thrones. It wasn't, it didn't have any of the fun to me, like, starting off the bat, right? Like, you see Geralt and he's fighting monsters right away. I'm like, hooray! Okay, I can get behind this. I can deal with those other dicier things because of that. But when Game of Thrones starts and it's just the dicey stuff and no real payoff other than you're shocked or you're laughing at the shock of it being so dark, then it's like, I'm a dark humorist, but that wasn't my cup of tea. So. And to think there are certain things that can pull you out of that, and you can have that interaction with them, and it can actually, change your mindset or get you through some things. But overall, I'd say, the energy level I was bringing to the conversation with this media was dragging its energy down with me for the most part.
Well, I could feel that too. I mean, I don't know if it's because people have been I know there's not a lot of people who have truly continued to be locked down over the course of 2021, but going to the theater as an experiment that we have, been toying with over the latter half of this year. Most of the films, and at the times we've decided to go see them, have been mostly sparse. And so, for the most part, my wife and I have been the only ones in the theater, or next to the only ones in the theater, except for Spider-Man. And Spider-Man was the first one that we went to that was, I guess we were surprised.
And I had heard everything was sold out, which was why I did not go see Spider-Man. I was like, oh, I think this is going to be the difference. I don't think I don't want to risk that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were very surprised. I mean, because we happen to be in a place where there's just a lot of theaters per person in our particular area, and so it's hard to still go to theater or to shows where it's more than 2 or 3 sold out shows a night. There's almost always space. So we were pretty surprised, and we got in there, and our experience was, I enjoyed the movie so much that it would have been very difficult for someone to ruin that. But I now, based on how people were acting, don't want to go to the theater anymore. I'm like, oh, I thought I missed this, but maybe I didn't, because either it was always like this and I tolerated it, or people have lost their minds and do not and no longer know how to act when they're around any other human beings. And or maybe I'm just old. I got old. I got older. And so now I go into a theater and I tell people to get off my lawn.
Well, and the year 2020 did age us all a decade, right? So
yeah. So I mean that makes me less inclined to want to see stuff. And then again, if it was almost anything else besides Spider-Man, probably would have left more of a sour taste in my mouth about the film itself.
Mm-hmm.
But when I reflect back, kind of thinking back to the what I think is the original piece of the question, like what I'm bringing to the table, or what I've been bringing to the table for almost 2 years now, has been like exhaustion brought on by this anxiety that I talked about, right? So we get the kids down. We don't have an obligation in the evening, and I'm sitting there with my wife, and she's like, "Well, what do you want to watch?" And I was like, "Well, there's 3 options. We have this, this, and this." And I was like, "This is supposed to be really, really good." And she's like, "But what's it about?" And then I proceed to say some very difficult or heavy subject, and she's like, "Yeah, that's going to be a no from me." And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I feel it's like, so in again, I know we're not fully talking about 2021, so, but still big picture. I know that for a portion of 2020 and then a good portion more of 2021, my watching habits have leaned, again, understandably. Now that I'm doing, I'm justifying it, right? Justifiably towards just being more entertained than I am engaged, because I need something that does not require a great deal of me.
Yeah.
So I went and looked back through my letterbox, and especially for this year, and I was like, God, I watched so much crap. But there's a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't have to pay attention to. I didn't have to think about. And if I'm really pressed on it, I'm kind of like, did that really need to be made? So I can still be a little bit elitist in there, even though I'm still watching it. But yeah, that's how I felt. Well, honestly, I may post this even though it wasn't an Advent thing. I have been super into professional wrestling.
Oh, yeah.
So I've been spending a lot of time watching professional wrestling unabashedly, and just loving it as one of the most rewarding weekly shows that I could watch. I mean, again, I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of it, but suffice to say, it's not watching typical WWE stuff. It's watching a different promotion that I've been following that I've really enjoyed. So I spent a lot of time doing that. It's been great.
Well, I just to add on to your exhaustion comment, I think there's a lot of despair is probably not the right word, but something in that vein of like the world doesn't feel the way that it did. And I don't just mean the pandemic. I mean the way that we interact with each other and the way that that sort of the world, like, to the point where, like, going back to Hamilton, the hopefulness of the sort of middle to end of Hamilton, where they've won the war and the United States is off and running, feels almost like painful to watch, and now we've got an entire group of people who claim Christianity basically being Aaron Burr and trying to find ways to secure power by hook or by crook, and that feels, even though this was Hamilton was recorded in 2016, it feels really of the moment, and not that it wasn't happening in 2016, I guess, just we didn't necessarily notice it, but especially coming off of listening to The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, which you also mentioned earlier, that feels like, and I guess that's a 2021 thing, but hey, here we go. That still has this sort of feeling of just like it's people that are trying to get power in a way that, like, you shouldn't be able to get power, And I maintain that, like, I think I posted this, the Jesus of the Bible, it's impossible to gain power from the Jesus of the Bible. Like, you have to make your own Jesus if you want to use it to gain power. And I think that all of that sort of informs the way that I am watching films right now, especially ones that were made before sort of this hyper focused level of polarization. It makes everything feel a little bit different in one way or another. So, like, just thinking about the other films that that sort of came out during that time, like thinking about Greyhound and about how that's set in World War II, where everything was a whole lot simpler than it is now, a whole lot more straightforward and black and white, and it was okay to punch Nazis at the time, and that all that sort of stuff, and Onward, where there's this sort of longing to get back to a world that has sort of disappeared now. I find myself looking longingly back at the 90s, which is something I never expected to do. Like, I was a teenager in the 90s. I was supposed to hate everything about my life at the time, and also, I'm aware, very much aware, that I'm pushing 40. So that's the sort of thing that I'm sure is I'm just of the age where I'm looking longingly back at my childhood. But also, this world is complicated and difficult and hard to wrap my head around, and so it feels like a lot of stuff is broken, and so the amount of despair that I bring with me into a movie like this definitely informs, or a TV show like The Good Place or whatever, where I'm thinking like, oh, well, wouldn't it be nice to be dead, or whatever, like just all of this sort of stuff
nice to be dead.
Is it brings with it a whole different level of weight to it, and yeah, so I'm intrigued by the way that all of that sort of stuff works, just because God didn't make us to interact with any of these stories in a vacuum. We're bringing who we are, yes, but we're also bringing the world that we come from into these films and these TV shows that we're looking into, and so I'm intrigued that over the next however long, I'm intrigued to look into that sort of thing as we continue to explore the way this stuff works.
Yeah,
so.
Just tacking on to the middle section there, you're talking about like Hamilton feeling hopeful and whatnot. I was reading an article the other day talking about how some of people of a younger generation than us three have found some of those bits of media and archetypes even to be rather cringy now, to where Hamilton is almost a weird whitewashing of the founding fathers. It's like, oh, you cast them as black people, now we're supposed to think that they're nice and they're acceptable because they're played by minorities, and really those are slave owners that they're representing, and we shouldn't like them, and that's just they want to throw the whole thing out. And Leslie Knope is a horrible character in general, trying to do the right thing from the inside and expecting it to change, like that's ever going to work. Like all these kind of, it's like, it kind of it just weighs on that kind of, how is the culture changing its views on those as time goes on. And like you were saying, it's just, we're bringing a heaviness, a weariness, a despair to these things, and it's like, we're looking for hope. We just don't know sometimes where to look, and that's why, thankfully, we've got the theology part of our real world to cling on to.
Well, and hopefully, as we enter these things, even if we're entering them in despair, hopefully we can find a way to not only redeem them in a theological sense, but also redeem the way that we're entering those worlds, where we're able to come out of it with a little bit more hope, even if it's just well, at least we're not in as bad a place as whatever we're watching on screen, like Tenet.
Zing.
Drop the mic. Yeah.
If you want to watch a time driven movie. Primer's good. Groundhog Day, Palm Springs, like we said. You don't need to waste your time.
Yeah, like
Pun intended.
Star Trek already did the concept better than
First
Tenet
Contact,
did, right? So like, yeah. Yep. Yeah.
I mean, just for Google Analytic purposes, we'll just in the show notes just make sure we link to the
there you go.
the pitch meeting for Tenet.
Yeah.
That way, you know. But I would say this. I think our goal was to talk about 2020, the year we missed, right? The year the real world theology kind of Avengers blipped from the planet, right? It just we real world theology, the podcast, kind of
didn't feel so good
away, and now we have. It didn't feel so good. It didn't feel great. I didn't want to go, and now hopefully we're back after 2 years. The world has changed. The world has changed a lot. We've come back, just like our intrepid Avengers friends who missed 5 years, and found that the world has moved on and found ways to cope. And very, very different ways than when we left.
Right.
And because of that, it is maybe not scary. Maybe that's going a little too far for us, because we're still, mostly white, middle-aged, doing okay dudes. So we're going to be okay. But it is different. And it is new. And hopefully there's a little bit of excitement to engage in a world that has almost forgot how to engage honestly. And it only knows how to engage in a very polarized way, which if I'm being honest, I realize that I'm going to engage in probably a polarized way a lot. Again, I'm not gonna trivialize a global pandemic. I'm not gonna really have a both sides of a is science real kind of conversation with people. But at the same time, I want there to be nuance. I want to engage art. I want to engage people's creativity. And I want us to give people something to think about. I want to have a space where people can themselves start conversations or hear something that allows them to start a conversation with people that may in their lives that they may have not had an inroad with or have not exactly known how to address things. I want art. I want entertainment. I want film. I want video games. I want good books to be engaging us and once again turning our brains on and coming out of a malaise of just needing to be entertained from this very hard, difficult life that we're dealing with right now. And us to have some fun again.
Yeah.
So this would be the part of the show where if I was in full host mode, I would thank everyone for being here. And I would give everyone a chance to plug what they're doing or what they have done recently.
I think probably let's just speed run the outro of if you want to interact with us,
Twitter.
Check the Real World Facebook group or the link in the description for our individual Twitter accounts and hook up with us that way or whatever.
I mean, and you could probably find just about anybody if you want to follow at Real World Theo on Twitter. Like David said, the Facebook group is there. Facebook has changed, or it's so meta now that it's actually it was a place in 2020 and 2021 that I made resolutions to go back to, but I have not deactivated my Facebook account. Mostly because I still love the fact that there are people talking in real world theology, but I just can't, for my own sanity, go to Facebook a lot. But if you can deal with that, the Real World Facebook Theology group is still there. Share what you're watching. Share how bummed you are that we're back. And now you have more things to listen to because you've already gone to listen to better and cooler podcasts. Whatever. But it's there for you. If you can do it, I wish I could. I can't right now. But we still have lots of cool people in there. Which, I mean, probably got cooler when I stopped going there. And if you'd like to specifically support the show, you can do so by going to realworldtheology.com/support. And As always, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. We actually really need to look at this again because we probably need to be on lots of other things now because in the past 2 years, podcasts have become more a bigger deal than they were before. And I say a bigger deal, meaning everyone's got one, not that they're actually that important. But there's lots of other places we need to probably look into getting this so that it's on your app of choice. But for right now, know that you can get us through iTunes. Know that you can get us
Google
through
Podcasts.
the website. But for now, for Real World Theology, I'm Fizz, reminding you that story is powerful and entertainment is not mindless.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Nicely done.
Yeah, I was going to say, Brian, how can we follow you
There's
on
a mismatch of letters.
At some point. So
We're going to be a lot grittier, a lot more swearing, a lot more gore for your
You
ears.
promise?
I think we also need to make sure to call out, stuff like I don't know. I'm gonna probably cut this.
Done. David, how can we follow you?
Another mismatch of letters. Illimarada.
Then you
Twitter.
can find us through him. If not, then you can tweet at him that he's a bad friend and he needs to follow us. So that way you can find us too. Yeah.
I will not forget that.
I want to make sure we call out stuff like insert thing here.
Yeah.
So
That's an interesting
now I feel
title
bad.
as well. I didn't know what I was getting into. I watched Insert Thing Here.
Yeah, when I saw insert thing here, it was like at the really end of the year, and I was really emotionally drained.
The thing that's really going to bug
didn't
me
do a
is
lot
that
for
I've
me.
forgotten it.
All sorts of sounds. You're just not ready.
Sorry to our listeners who have misophonia.